Okay, everyone, today we're going to talk about converting metric units, and this is going to be a mini lesson. Metric units actually make more sense numerically than customary, but sometimes they're trickier for us because in the United States, we don't measure everything with metric in the metric system. So when we look at this, okay, this looks like a huge big fat chart, okay, but it works for everything in the metric system. So they talk about a basic unit. Okay, so let's just talk about grams because that's something that's used in the metric system. If you have a gram, okay, if you have 10 grams, that's called a decagram. If you have 100 grams, it's a hectogram. If you have 1,000 grams, it's a kilogram. Okay, so notice it goes up by 10 every time. Okay. Now, deca and hecto are not used that often, so we don't often talk about deca and hecto, but I want you to know that they're there. Okay, our biggest thing that we're going to think about is that when we have grams, 1,000 of those is going to be a kilogram. And then we can look smaller here, and we can say, okay, well, if we have parts of a gram, okay, so 1/10 of a gram, so meaning you don't even have a whole gram, you have just one section of it. 1/10 of a gram is a decigram. Okay, 1/100th of a gram is a centigram. And 1/1000th of a gram is a milligram. Now that can get a little bit tricky because it's 1,000th, but it's milli. And a lot of people like to say, well, milli seems like it should be million. And it's not here, it's thousand. Okay, so that means 1,000 milligrams is a gram. And 100 centigrams is a gram. And again, we don't use deci very often. We typically stick with the milli and the centa and the regular basic unit and the kilograms. Okay? The other thing that is going to come into play here is this chart right here where they talk about moving the decimal point. And we'll go through that together in our mini lesson next. Whoop. Okay, so again, this is just a chart to kind of keep us on track. A kilometer or kilometer is 1,000 meters. A meter is 100 centimeters. A meter is 1,000 milliliters. A centimeter is 10 millimeters. So notice everything goes in powers of 10. And then a liter would be 1,000 milliliters. A kilogram is 1,000 grams. And a gram is 1,000 milligrams. So your best thought is to remember that milli is 1,000 and kilo is 1,000. Okay, and we'll kind of keep going through that. So down here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it on the video, but in Khan Academy, they give you this chart to refer to so that you have this if you want to. You just have to click on to show a chart. Okay, so if we work on this one to complete the table to convert the units of measure from milliliters to liters or liters to milliliters, I'm going to go ahead and do that same thing that I've been doing. And I'm going to say, okay, well, they tell me that 1 liter is 1,000 milliliters. So now if I have 500 milliliters, okay, I want to know how many liters I have. Well, 1,000 divided by 2 is 500 milliliters. So 1 divided by 2, that's going to be half. So decimal 5 liters. It's going to be half of a liter. Okay? Now, the other thing that they talk about is that you can just look at moving the decimal. Okay? And really the decimal in 500s here. So if you want to move that decimal in 500 to liters, you're going to move it 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and that would also give you decimal 5. Okay? Because you're dividing it by 1,000. Okay? So then, again, using my equivalent fraction method, now they tell us, okay, 4 liters is how many milliliters? So 1 times 4 is 4, so 1,000 times 4 means it's going to be 4,000 milliliters. Okay, so for our next one, it says to convert that many centimeters into meters. Okay, well, I know, and I can look down here if I need help, that there's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. So if I'm trying to make that equivalent fraction, then I'm going to say, okay, well, 1,600 centimeters is how many meters? Well, 1 times 16, okay, so 100 times 16 is going to be 1,600. So if I did times 16 on the top to keep it equivalent, I'm going to do times 16 on the bottom. 1 times 16 is going to give me 16 meters. So my answer is 16 up here. Okay, so these equivalent fractions, this is not how everybody does this. This is a way that works for me, and it might work for you. Sometimes kids can look at that and they can say, well, I can just think through that in my head. And I can think through and say, well, 1,600 meters, if I know that there's 100 centimeters in a meter, I can figure out that that's going to be 16 meters. If that works for you, that's amazing and that's awesome. You have to do what works for you. Okay, so this next one asks us, okay, now grams. So 0.3 grams, so 3/10 of a gram, or 400 milligrams. Now to help us on this one, I'm going to change both of them to my smallest unit. Okay, so I already have this one in milligrams, and I want to try to figure out what this one would be in milligrams. So if I know that 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. Oops, I'm going to try mg. Okay, so if I know 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams, and here I have 0.3 grams, okay, and I want to know how many milligrams that's going to be. So I've got to look and say, okay, well, when I looked at this, okay, to change my 1 into 0.3, okay, and to look at this, I should be able to move my decimal 3 times, 1, 2, 3, to get that this is going to be 300 milligrams. Okay, so that's going back to that chart a little bit more. This is a harder one to do in the equivalent fraction form, and that's where knowing that chart that we talked about at the very beginning is going to help us. Okay, so for this one, this decimal 3 grams is actually 300 milligrams, because we know that 1 whole gram would be 1,000 milligrams. I don't have a whole gram, so it's 300 milligrams. I moved that decimal, okay, 1, 2, 3 spots to get to 300. So which one is greater is going to be my 400 milligrams. Okay, so go ahead and grab some paper and then we'll do some practice problems together.